Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that is joining us today. Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and we look forward to having a very interesting and insightful conversation. My name is Alex Dempsey. I'm the CEO of the Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation, and I am honored to welcome you to the second session of our Navigate with Care webinar series. Today's session, Environmental Impacts on Boating, marks the second webinar of an important conversation on how we as mariners, conservationists, scientists, and ocean advocates can work together to protect our fragile marine ecosystems. Just going to go through just a couple overviews here about the Navigate with Care campaign. So we can have the first slide come up. Excellent. Okay, so fantastic. The Navigate with Care campaign is a global initiative that's co-led by the Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation and the International Foundation for AIDS to Navigation, or IFAN for short. And together, our organizations are committed to raising awareness on how boating impacts marine environments and how to provide practical solutions that empower mariners to act as stewards to the ocean. This initiative is also an official UN Ocean Decade activity, which means our work continues, towards the global efforts to build a healthier and more sustainable ocean for future generations. For those who may not know, IFAN is a nonprofit that enhances maritime safety worldwide by improving navigation systems, supporting technical expertise, and advancing safe shipping practices, all while trying to reduce risks to the environment. The Khalid bin Sultan Living Oceans Foundation, or KSLOF, is dedicated to conserving coral reefs and tropical marine ecosystems through science, education, and outreach. And we believe in inspiring people everywhere to protect the oceans that sustain us. Next slide, please. Every boat that enters the water has potential to leave a mark. Anchors dropped on coral reefs can shatter centuries of growths in seconds. Next slide. Here we have another photo here of an anchor chain that's creating some damage to some coral reef benthic communities on the right, and then the left again, an anchor that's dropped right on top of a coral reef that's probably taken hundreds and hundreds of years to grow. Next slide. Propellers also can scar seagrass meadows, nurseries that are, that are habitats that are nurseries for countless marine species, leaving trails that take years, even decades to heal. Next slide. You can see here in an aerial photo from the Florida Keys, where you can see all of the different those white lesions there on the seagrass beds are all from propeller prop scars and probably anchor draggings as well. That's it for the slides. Thanks. So these impacts are obviously magnified by climate change, which already place immense stress on coral reefs and seagrass beds. By reducing these local threats, such as anchor damage, prop scarring, and noise pollution, we give these ecosystems a fighting chance to withstand global challenges. The good news is that with awareness and the right tools, like mooring buoys, updated charts, and aids to navigation, boaters can minimize their impact and even lead the way in ocean stewardship. No one is better positioned to protect the ocean than those who enjoy and rely on it. And so therefore today we'll hear from an exceptional group of panelists who are experts to share their best practices, tools, and strategy for safe navigation. And our goal here for the webinar is to demonstrate how responsible boating benefits not only the environment, but also the people and communities who depend on healthy oceans. So let's get started. First, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Richard Falk. He is the Director of Training and Qualifications from the Royal Yachting Association. Next, we have Felice Major, who's the Deputy Director of the Bahamas Marine Mammal Research Organization. And then lastly, Davey Klein, who's the Executive Director of the Pacific Blue Foundation. And first, I think I'd like to start off with an introductory question to Richard. As the Director of Training and Qualifications at the Royal Yachting Association, can you provide an overview of how boaters can minimize their environmental impacts? Hoping that you can give us perhaps, some ideas on best practices mariners can use and any tools or resources that might be helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks very much, Alex. If we can pop the slides up, that would be great. Thank you very much. And I suppose I should start with just a little introduction about what the RYA, the Royal Yachting Association, is, because many of you won't have heard of us. We're the national governing body for all forms of boating in the UK. So I'm an Australian living in the UK, and I've been in this role for about 15 years. But why are we here? Well, we've got 2,500 training centres dotted across the world. We're in 58 countries. We train about 290,000 people a year in one form of boating or another. So we have the potential to have some quite positive impacts here. And I guess the second thing I would say is that what I'm going to talk about here is most definitely not a definitive list of things to do or not to do. It's simply scratching the surface, which is all we can really do in 5 minutes that I've got. And the other thing to say is that so many of the things that are good practice in terms of caring for the environment and the sea, and developing the individuals that get on board boats. So many of those things not only have a positive impact on the sea, but actually are critical safety factors for being safe on the water for those individuals. So if we can move forward to the next slide, thanks. So the first thing I just wanted to talk about is one of three areas. The first one really is about navigation, and what individuals can do here. And it's very much, I suppose, a list. And underpinning navigation is the whole concept of passage planning, which should be from berth to berth, from when you leave your berth or your mooring to when you arrive in at your destination. And typically we consider things like navigation, pilotage, fuel, weather, perhaps hazards along the way. But the other thing that's really crucial is actually building into that passage planning the environmental factors. Incorporating things like details of anchorages and moorings into your passage planning decisions are really important. Awareness of no-go or restricted areas, national parks, areas that perhaps might be designated for scientific research and so on. They're almost always clearly identified on charts. And so part of the passage planning process should be to familiarize yourself with these things so that you're not inadvertently anchoring in those areas, speeding through them in inappropriate speeds, and so on. And importantly, understanding what resources are available out there. So, for example, on all navigational charts, you'll have notes, and often in those notes will be a descriptor about areas of particular sensitivity in terms of, the environment. Next slide, please. The second thing that I just want to talk about is knowledge. So understanding the rules and bylaws that might apply to a particular area or region. But more than that, understanding what good practice looks like. So just because there isn't a rule saying that you should or shouldn't do something doesn't mean that there's perhaps not, good practice to be had in the way you are behaving in that area. It was mentioned already by Alex, but anchoring, probably the most obvious impact that we have, because we're actually impacting the seabed. How to anchor effectively, where to anchor, the types of anchor, and not only anchor, but anchor, chain, and warp configuration. And when I say anchoring properly, not just where you're anchoring, but how much chain and warp you're laying out. Not using more than you need, making sure you use enough that you have good holding, understanding the symbols that are on the chart that identify the seabed. So, for example, understanding what the symbol is for seagrass, so that you can choose an area perhaps 50 yards to the other side, which perhaps is sand or silt, which not only is going to be better for the environment, but actually is much better holding, much firmer holding as well. And of course, knowledge of speed restrictions and distances off in areas where sea life is at risk, particularly when you're talking about large mammals, and you're talking about things like migratory patterns for whales and so on. Understanding what the legal distances off are, but then applying those from a moral viewpoint, not just I won't get fined, but actually those rules are there in one location for a reason, and applying those same principles when you perhaps are in an area where they don't have promoted rules or regulations, but actually adopting that as good practice. Next slide, please. And of course, behaviors. So speed. So behaviors, what I'm talking about there is choices people are making about how they behave, how they use their boats. Speed is an obvious one. Again, safety for sea life, but of course, safety for individuals on board. Now, it doesn't mean you can't drive your boat fast. It simply means that you apply your brain before making the decision to do so. Looking at the location, looking at not only the safety factors, other traffic, sea state, and so on, but actually the environmental factors, the depth, for example, or sea life that's likely to be present. Choosing to use moorings where you can rather than anchoring. So, certainly the Great Barrier Reef on the east coast of Australia, for example, for more than 30 years, they've had moorings installed in many of, if not all of, the sensitive reef areas, and quite firm regulations in place, meaning that when you go to those areas, you either pick up a mooring or you move on to somewhere else. You simply cannot anchor in those locations without being fined. So applying those principles to other areas. Good practice when refueling, having dams built around fuel inlets using, appropriate socks and so on, absorbent material, so that if there is some minor spillage, it can be mopped up without being allowed to run overboard. Using holding tanks where possible, rather than discharging sewage into the sea. Environmentally friendly cleaning products. There's some easy decisions to make about when you're buying a product to clean, be it the deck of your boat, the hull, or whatever it is, choosing something that is environmentally responsible rather than the cheapest item on the shelf. Adopting a policy of nil overboard. So, I think these days, I'd like to think most people are reasonably sensitive about plastics and cigarette butts and so on. But actually, why not apply the same principle to anything? There's no reason for anything to go overboard and so make that an easy decision for your crew. Don't have the rubbish bin down below at the other end of the boat where they're going to struggle to get to it every time they've had a sweetie wrapper or a banana skin. Actually make sure those bins are in nice accessible areas that people can get to with a minimum of fuss. Simple things like, if you've got smokers on board, taping a used soft drink can, soda can to a stanchion on board, or securing it somewhere so that their cigarette butt can go in there rather than them being tempted to throw it overboard. Educate your crew and your guests. Make the whole environmental piece and minimizing your environmental footprint, make that part of your familiarization brief on the boat, not just about holding on and how to use the heads on board and where the safety equipment is, but actually get them to buy into the whole protecting the environment that they're in. And finally, it's not just about telling people about it, it's about role modeling. So walk the walk. You show people how they should be behaving by doing that yourself. And that is a much better opportunity then of people sort of buying into that whole notion of taking some responsibility for protecting those blue spaces. And I think that was the last sorry, the next slide, thanks. We've got a few areas of, in terms of resources. So we run over 100 training courses across those 58 countries we're in on all sorts of boats. And built into each of those training courses are the general principles about responsible boat usage, not only in terms of safety, but in terms of environment as well. Secondly, we have a whole range of publications, more than 100 publications available through the RWA website. And they're available not only in hard copy, but also ebook, and some of them in audiobook format as well. Again, many of those build in the principles of sustainability into those publications. And then finally, the RWA's sustainability initiative is a program called the Green Blue, and that's focused on sharing good practice with businesses, with individuals, and so on. And you're welcome to go and have a look on the Green Blue website. It's got some free to download resources and lots of good ideas and resources on how to go boating responsibly. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Richard. And again, those resources, we will try to pop those in the chat as the webinar continues through. But thank you so much for that overview. And I like the notion of walk the walk, right? So make sure that you're being responsible out on the water, both for your own safety, but as well for the environment. So thank you so much, Richard. Davey, given your work as a coral reef ecologist in Fiji, can you speak to the most common and damaging impacts that boating has on coral reefs? I mean, we know that these ecosystems are quite fragile and can be quite sensitive, especially with the impacts of climate change placing such immense stress on these ecosystems. And why is it especially critical to reduce local threats like anchoring and physical damage from vessels?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So both you and Richard gave a really nice summary of the impacts that boating can have on coral reefs and other marine environments. But with climate change, there's been increasing mass bleaching events where the corals lose the algae that give them the energy to build the reefs, and they turn white and eventually die. And there's also been, with climate change, there's been a lot more coral diseases that have been killing corals all around the world. And anything we can do to reduce the stress on corals can make them more resilient to climate change. So by reducing anchor damage, by reducing fuel waste on the reef, we can actually help the corals be better prepared to deal with climate change and other stress. After Richard's nice presentation, I also wanted to add a couple things. The type of motor you use on your boat can have an impact on, one, your environmental impact, but two, also on the level of pollution. So using more fuel efficient motors like 4 strokes, and increasingly there are fully electric options coming out, these are cleaner and much more efficient, and hopefully boat owners can think about those choices and factor that in. If possible, try to get these better and cleaner motors. And then other thing I would also say is really important for boaters is think about where you dump your waste. So like the sewage or whatever, when you dump it, if you do it near a coral reef, nutrients can fuel the growth of seaweeds, which overgrow corals. They're actually coral's biggest competitor. They can overgrow and kill corals. And as well, high nutrients can increase the prevalence and severity of coral diseases. So really thinking about where you dump your waste is really important, and ideally doing it as far away from coral reefs and others sensitive ecosystems can have a really big impact.
So thanks so much, Davey. And I know at the Pacific Blue Foundation, they work extensively with local coastal communities that depend on the reef for their livelihood. And I know specifically in the Bengal Lagoon, they have a very interesting cross section of tourism, as well as local communities. Can you kind of share any tools or let's see, education or moorings that have been set up, particularly in that lagoon, and have you seen that make a positive impact in the surrounding ecosystem?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Alex. So with the Pacific Blue, we've been working with the 10 communities of Benga and Unutha, which is an hour south of Suva, which is the capital city of Fiji. And by working with these communities and gaining their trust, right when we first started in 2004, I gave some presentations to the community chiefs and leaders, and a lot of the community didn't even realize that corals were alive. So showing them that corals were alive, showing them the damage that anchors could do, really opened up their eyes. And over time, the really popular diving and boating sites had some moorings installed, and this was through collaborations with the biggest tourist operators. Once those moorings came in, the amount of coral damage went way down, and we actually saw reefs recover. So in about a 20-year period, we saw reefs that were in pretty bad shape, largely because of heavy anchor damage. We saw them come back and flourish. We've also been working with the local communities to boat more responsibly, to not put their waste on the reef, and have collection programs in many of the villages. There's now little actually recycled plastic bins. So old bins from, like, let's say, food products that they set up all around the community as trash receptacles, and the community runs it. By setting these up, we noticed that there was much less plastic waste on the reef, which has plastic and other types of trash can really damage corals. And by just simple things like having the community put out trash cans, those impacts were lessened. And we're also working with the communities to minimize their nutrient pollution on the reef. So we have programs where we help them plant mangroves, which actually act as a filter and remove a lot of the nutrients. And we also are working on programs where they plant algae in specific places that can also absorb the nutrients before they get to the reef. So I think our work in Benga and Unutha has shown that if you work with the communities and make it their programs and strategies, you really have the longer lasting impact. And all the work we do is in collaboration with the communities, and getting the communities to kind of take ownership of all these conservation programs, I think is the way to really protect coral reefs, seagrasses, and mangroves for future generations. And programs like the program Richard was describing of responsible boating is a really key part of these actions as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Davey. And I know the Living Oceans Foundation and Pacific Blue have gone way back and done lots of community engagement and a lot of other scientific works in that area. So please check out both the Pacific Blue website as well as the Living Oceans website to learn more about the Benga Unutha Seascape. We also have a UN Ocean Decade endorsed program that's separate from this campaign, but also, would love for you all to check that out and learn more about that. Thanks so much, Davey.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning. From your research at the Bahamas Marine Mammal Research Organization, what are some of the significant impacts recreation and commercial boating traffic have on marine mammals in the Bahamas? I know we've spoken about, in terms of the benthic environment with the seagrasses, mangroves, and coral reefs, but what about the other species that are affected by boat traffic?
Good morning, everyone. Well, in the Bahamas, we have the shallow water banks, and then we have locations that drop off to the ocean really quickly. So we do get to study both the coastal marine mammal species like the bottlenose dolphins, and then we also get to study those oceanic dolphins and whales out in the ocean. Recently, and I shouldn't say recently, but it is recent for our country. Since about 1999, we've had an increase in increase in population of manatees in the Bahamas. I'm not going to talk too long about manatees because I know, given the Florida manatee population, most people should be well versed in manatees and how boating affects them. But that is something that we've had to monitor here. So our manatee awareness campaign is pretty strong. The Bahamas residents, we live on the beach. We have fishing communities that are always right on the coast, using the coast for fishing. And then, of course, we have our tourism industry, and the manatees are coming right up to the beaches. They're going right up to the docks. And they're in search of fresh water, or they just want the interaction because they're curious. And so we have had to have a campaign to teach our manatee manners. Don't feed them, don't water them, try not to touch them. If you see them in the area, try to slow down and get others to slow down. So we have had that little issue to deal with, especially with our friendly mobile manatees. They like to go from island. And given the development that we have for boaters and tourism in the country, speedboats and boat rentals and jet ski rentals, everyone wants to have a good time. But the dolphins are also there. And so we're starting a bottlenose dolphin awareness campaign in Abaco, because that's where our headquarters is, on Great Abaco in Marsh Harbor. And Abaco's geography, we have a main island, and then we have a lot of coastal islands and keys. And so just how people would go to and from work in vehicles, they're using boats. And so when the tourists visit, they're also using the boats to experience the beauty of the Abacos. And prior to all of that development and increased boat use, the bottlenose population there was thriving. But given the development, the boat traffic, and then also the hurricanes that we've been experiencing as climate change has created larger storms, we've noticed a decline in that population. And then we had Hurricane Dorian, and not too long after, we had COVID. And in the regular world, these things were very bad for all of us. However, in the scientific world, we had passive acoustic recorders out, and we were able to document the noise prior to and after these events. And what we learned from that, given the bottlenose population, once everything got quiet, after the hurricane and the destruction, the docks and marinas were no longer there, the dolphins came back. And it didn't take them long to come back. And with our data, we do try to take habitat data as well, so that we can document what kind of environment they are in, coral reefs, whether it's seagrass. So we could kind of get an understanding of what they're feeding on and how good these other species are doing. Because if they have food, then they can thrive. And so that's the big question. Why are they coming back? And so we have been doing surveys there since to basically get a better understanding of the population. And we have seen them, we see them reproducing. However, the boat traffic is back and it's in full effect, but the dolphins are there. And so we are monitoring them, and we've started an awareness campaign. And basically it goes on to what Richard was speaking about. We may not have the complete area protected, but what we're trying to do is, like Davey said, gain the community and the public support in just having that moral understanding of, if we slow down just a little bit, we could help decrease this noise. And so dolphins and whales do use echolocation for foraging to get their food, and also for communicating with one another, whether it's for family or hiding from predators or looking for prey. And so the noise from these boats, whether it's the smaller commercial boats or larger vessels for transporting goods, as the economy has increased and shipping has increased, we have a lot of ships that pass through the Bahamas in the ocean, and I'll talk about that once I'm done with the dolphins. So we're just trying to get people to say, if we slow down a little bit, and we know the dolphins use this area as a hotspot for feeding or resting with their calves, and also some routes. It may not be mandated by law, like Richard said, but it's a moral obligation to know that if you're using this area, the dolphins are here. It's amazing to observe them in their natural habitat. And also we should respect them in their home. So that's our awareness campaign that we're going to start in the Abacos for the bottlenose dolphin, and we're going to hope that we can also expand that to other high developed marine traffic areas where the bottlenose dolphins are using the area. And when it comes to our oceanic species, we had passive acoustic recorders out, and we were actually able to publish this study. So feel free to check out our website if you do want some of the science on these things. www.bahamaswhales.org, or you can type in @BMMRO, that's our handle. And what we found was that because of COVID and some of the ships had to stop or slow down, as I mentioned, we have a lot of ships passing through the Bahamas to get to Florida or South America or across the Atlantic. We found that a 1 knot decrease or slow made a significant difference. It made everything about 41% quieter. So the ships were quieter, and the animals were just, they made more noise. They fed more. We heard them clicking more. We heard them talking more. And so a 1 knot decrease resulted in such a huge, significant difference. And so we did publish that study, and we're hoping to get support in that regard, that we can now contribute to policy in regards to shipping and the noises that they're making. And we try to look at the bigger picture with our studies. Like I told you, we always take habitat data. So it's not just about the dolphins and the whales. We think about all of our important marine resources, export species, the Nassau grouper, the spiny lobster. A lot of these species have a larval stage. They're mating aggregation. So the grouper, the Nassau groupers specifically, if they can't hear each other making their mating calls, the aggregations cannot aggregate. And so the recordings that we're getting can also contribute to that science as well, to say that there's a little bit too much noise. It's having a negative effect on our export species, the Nassau grouper, which then affects our economy, because other than tourism, our fishing industry is really the backbone of our nation. We have a lot of islands, some of them well developed, but those that are not rely on fishing. And so we try to have a good relationship with our communities, because we don't get to be out in the boat all the time. The fishermen are always out there. And so outreach and awareness is the way we're going in regards to it, but we're also using our science to hopefully direct policy. So yes, marine mammals, manatees, dolphins, and whales are all affected by the noise, but there is a bigger picture that we have to look at as well for the overall marine habitat.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Felice. And I think we put some of those resources that you mentioned in the chat, so please check that out. Absolutely super, super interesting work. Just for a quick follow-up question, can you give maybe a 20-second overview on what passive acoustic surveys are for those that don't come necessarily from the science world, just to give a little bit of background on that?
Yes, I'm sorry.
No,
So
no.
what we do, so what we usually do when we go out in our boat to see the dolphins, whales, and manatees, we always have a camera. We have a very fancy camera. And we also encourage citizen science. So if anyone is in the Bahamas and you see manatees, dolphins, or whales, please take a photo, take a video, and send it in, because we can potentially use it for ID. But because we can't get out there all the time, and funding only gets us so many vessel surveys per year, we put out these microphones, underwater microphones. And so we can just latch them to an area, and we make sure that we're not destroying any habitat, and we latch it down to the bottom of the sea, or we would moor it. Especially for the deeper water whales, we'd need it kind of in the middle of the water column, so that we don't get all of that choral sound from all those animals. And so we have that microphone out there, and it's recording for us. So even though we're not out there taking a photo of the whale or seeing the whale, we're recording the sounds of the dolphins or the whales or manatees as well. And we can have that to say the animal was in this area at this time. And what we are also able to do is, if we hear any boat sounds, we can say the animals were here, the boat moved over, the animal went quiet, the animal started again. And so it does give us a lot of information because it can be out there longer than we can. And it just gives us a lot of extra data. And the passive acoustic recorders are very valuable because it's not marine mammal specific and it allows us to collaborate. And collaboration is key. When we go out in the ocean, the animals and the environment are all together. So we can't work separately. We have to always collaborate. So it helps.
Amazing. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. That gives a lot of context to a lot of what you were speaking about. I'm just going to have a couple questions now open to the group, and if you could just say a few words. We'll start with Richard, then Davey, then Felice. So I know we've talked a lot about positive behavior changes, positive positive community engagement regarding safe boating practices, but what barriers still exist when it comes to educating boaters about environmental impacts? And how can the organizations, or how do the organizations that you all work for, help fill those gaps?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest challenge is reaching the audience. To my mind, we have the benefit of, as I said, 290,000 people a year go through our courses. So we have the opportunity of direct engagement with those people. But what we don't have is easy access to the other millions of people that are out there actively boating, either as leisure boaters or people operating small commercial vessels, or even on larger commercial shipping, and so I think the biggest barrier is the ability to communicate with those audiences. When you have the opportunity to actually sit down and have a conversation with people, or if I've run boats, I've operated commercially, I was a diving instructor for many years. When you start talking about this with people, their ears prick up and they are interested, and they're truly quite passionate about it. But if they're not prompted through through the opportunity to speak with them, engage with them directly, then it's very challenging to change that behavior, or to get them to think about that behavior. And I think there's probably opportunity for everyone in this space to be somewhat of a champion. If you see bad behavior, call it out, not in a threatening way, not in a stick waving way, but just have a conversation about it. Did you know? Have you thought about doing this differently? Those sorts of things that over time will, I'm sure, have a positive impact. And of course, any organization that has the opportunity to put out interesting, informative knowledge, such as this webinar, I think we should take it, we should amplify it, we should spread the word, and that's our most effective tool, I think, in trying to get the messaging across.
Amazing, thank you, Davey.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. To build on what Richard says, in our experience, education is a really critical part of it. So we work with the local schools on the islands and in the communities where we work. And I feel like by educating the youth, we are actually training future ocean champions. And a lot of these children, when they grow up, they're going to be the future boaters. And if they're aware and they care, that's going to pay huge dividends in terms of protecting the local ecosystem. So I would say education is key. I would say, in our experience, working with all the different local stakeholders, so the communities, the tourist industries that run the boating and the hotels, as well as commercial fishermen and other stakeholders, other areas, other people that are actually using the resources. If we can have programs, engagement programs with them, it goes a really long way to having a sustainable impact and making people aware and making people want to do something to be better and to better protect the ecosystems that all of their businesses and their livelihoods depend on. So for me, I think education is probably key. And you can think about education in many different ways, not just schools, but also webinars such as this, programs in the communities, in all the different areas where people are using and working in the ecosystems.
No, that's a really, really good point, Davey. I think, ensuring that everybody has a seat at the table, when discussing these issues, because again, it's cross-cutting, but amongst several different demographics of people. And yes, absolutely, the next generation of ocean stewards are now, learning more and more about their surrounding ecosystems, and learning, more about, the coastal habitats that they actually live right next to. And I think that's an incredibly important to get people, especially children, engaged, and caring about how interacting with the ocean affects the environment as well as their livelihood. Felice, your thoughts, please.
Thanks. I think they said a lot. My only other recommendation would be to boaters, especially if they're visiting somewhere that they don't live. If you're not going to be on land to interact with fishermen or people who live there, maybe it's good to do some research on your smartphone or your tablet on your way and just check to see, okay, what is this place about? What do they have going on? What can I see? What should I look out for? Because I've realized in education and awareness, a lot of people are unaware that we have marine mammals in the Bahamas, even Bahamians. And so for boaters coming to the Bahamas, to just have that awareness to say, well, we're going to the Bahamas and they have 28 documented marine mammal species in their waters. These are coastal, these are oceanic. Let's look out for them. In my travels, I think that would be a big deal to actually be aware. So I think it's just awareness to say, what is going on in this place I'm visiting? What do they have? What should I be looking out for? And I do agree with everything else that Richard and Davey already mentioned as well.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I think we just saw in the chat that the Q&A section is going to be kicking off here in a couple minutes. So if you have a question for the panelists, we can field those through the chat. But before we get there, just one more question for the group. And I know we've all covered a lot of topics here and have reiterated the same message, which is important. But has anyone seen or know of any obviously behavior change, but what about policy? Has there been any policy changes that you've seen in the Bahamas or in Fiji, or obviously in Australia we've seen it? So again, open to the panelists to just give maybe a couple examples, or perhaps maybe this is another barrier, is that policy is not quite caught up to the science and some of the other conservation actions. So please, Richard.
Yeah, sure. I did mention the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, but there are also, in other parts of Australia, particular regions or zones that have been designated as national parks or non-fishing areas or exclusion zones, non-anchoring areas, all depending on what the nature of that area is. And the same is true here in the UK, where I'm based these days, where there's areas of seagrass, areas of scientific interest, and so on. So there is good work going on. I think that's positive. But I'm not convinced that we've done a terribly good job necessarily as a country, in either country, of educating boaters, particularly leisure boaters, around what those areas mean and how best they can interact with them, and why, giving them the reason why. They're simply saying this is an area of scientific interest, don't go here. Well, why? What are they trying to achieve by that? So I think that there can be more done around that through documentaries, through social media, through various other mediums. But the challenge, as with many of these things, is having a way of funding it, having a way of pulling those messages together, making sure the messaging is in a format that's informative and interesting and engaging, not simply stick waving or lecturing people. I think that's the key. The more we can make this interesting and informative, the better chance we've got of getting people to buy into those policies, because they understand what they're there for. It's not simply a government or a regulator making up a rule to kill our fun. It's there to to promote and support a sustainable sector.
Thank you so much, Richard. Davey.
So in terms of policy that I've seen that is having a positive impact, there's a movement to have 30% of all the oceans protected by 2030, the 30 by 30 movement, and Fiji has signed on to that. And I think if all countries can protect 30%, it's going to really mean a lot for the ocean ecosystems. And I also agree with Richard that education is a really critical part of it, and engagement. And I think one way to maybe get boaters more interested and involved are citizen science programs. So not only do they know why they shouldn't go into areas, but if they can actually be part of the solution in terms of collecting data, they feel like they're part of the solution, and they can see how their actions can actually contribute to positive change. So I think developing good citizen science programs that involve boaters and users of the marine environment is another really important part of the puzzle to try to protect our marine ecosystems.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Davey. Felice.
Yeah, and as with the last one, I agree with both of those guys. In the Bahamas specifically, and we've seen this as a trend in the wider Caribbean and probably worldwide. We have to try and figure out a way to bring the community in for education to get their buy-in, because in the past, a lot of rules and regulations and lines have been drawn without speaking to them or without their consent. And if you don't have that buy-in, you're not going to have respect for those laws. But on a larger scale in the Bahamas, we've actually recently been labeled an important marine mammal area. And so that's been a big deal for us, because it isn't some big list of policy. It just, our research has fit the criteria to be labeled as this. And so when we share this information with locals and even visitors, they're like, wow, the Bahamas is an important marine mammal area. It's a simple term, but it holds so much weight, because it's like they know that this is important. They have gotten this international standing of an important marine mammal area. And so I think things like that really help. We were part of the 20 by 20 initiative, and now they're speaking about a 30 by 30. In the Bahamas, we're still dealing with capacity issues and funding issues, just like Richard and Davey spoke about. We can have all of these desires, but if we don't have the funding, and it all falls back down to the buy-in of the youth, the advocates who are going to advocate for the protection, because if we could get a moral understanding and a moral protection, that's what's going to work at the end of the day. If we have it, we won't even need policy. And so I think that that's really important, to have more passive listings. Of course, we need rules and regulations. It's the way the world is. But in this world, I think that moral understanding and a passive way of just labeling these places to say, this is important, this is why. And I think that's the way to go.
Amazing. No, that's really insightful. I like that. If the behavior can switch enough, you don't need a policy to enforce it. And I think that's a really good outlook to have on that. All right, it is time for the Q&A section. Let's go through here and see. We have, first one is for Richard. What do mariners most often overlook about safe navigation, particularly in these, sensitive areas, near the coast?
I think they probably don't go far enough in looking into the environmental aspects of what they're doing. So let me elaborate on that a little bit more. Passage planning is what we're talking about here. It's, I'm going from A to B. As a basic principle, that involves passage planning, working out where the hazards are, working out how you're going to get there, and so on. Now, at a very basic level, that's about not hitting hard bits, but actually going a little bit further and understanding whether on passage you're going to be passing through sensitive areas, in terms of what Felice was talking about with large marine animals and so on, or whether you're going to be anchoring when you arrive at your destination, doing the homework to understand where you're anchoring. Is that an appropriate area? Is it going to be good holding? But also, is it how am I going to be impacting the seabed and the sea life in that area if I'm anchoring there? So I think that's probably it. I think that's probably the gap. And the other thing we do see with mariners, and this is commercial and pleasure, is that failure to be engaging what we refer to as the Mark I eyeball. So in this digital age, there are many people that are navigating digitally, which is fine, but actually I think what they're sometimes forgetting to do or failing to do is to remain in the here and now by visually looking at what they where they're going, both from a hazard viewpoint, but also, as you say, an awareness of the sea life that's around you or the environment that's around you. It may not appear on a chart, but actually you may still be impacting it negatively if you're not seeing it.
Right. No, that makes sense. I know a lot of navigating and stuff these days does occur, digitally, and sometimes you don't, stick your head away from the chart or the map and look around to see that, perhaps, just more situational awareness a lot of times
Exactly.
is definitely needed. Thank you. Felice, this is a good one. Is there a story from your work where a boater's responsible actions made a positive difference for a marine mammal?
Yes. Trying to think of a specific one, but we have something in the Bahamas called the Bahamas Marine Mammal Stranding Network, and that's what we oversee. And basically, if there are any marine mammals in harm, danger, or unfortunately have passed and are on the beach or seem to be injured, people send us reportings and we go and respond. And so, like I've said, we are not able to be on every island. Our organization is small. The Bahamas is big. It's small, but it's big. And so we have key persons on each island that would respond to these situations. And so we have had boaters who have helped with this. They've either seen something and reported it, or we've put out our call. There's a stranded animal or an animal in need on this island. We need the team to come together. And we have had boaters just come. They bring the boat, they bring their equipment, they help us out. And so I don't have a specific one that's popping off to me right now. I'm trying to think. But the stories that do come to mind, of course, are the manatees. So we've had manatees that got entangled in some fishing line, or they ended up in really busy areas and needed to be relocated. And so we've had people really, really jump to this, and we are thankful for our team in the Bahamas Stranding Network. And if anyone's interested in what that does, it's right on the website. And if you be in the Bahamas a lot, and you want to be a part of that team, feel free to reach out and we could see how we can incorporate you, because it helps. Like I said, we can't be on every island, and our boaters do help, the people who are part of that stranded network. And I'm trying to think of a specific marine mammal story that I could share, but Yeah, it's our stranded network and their response, and most of them are boaters or fishermen, people who are always on the water, and so they do help there. So we do have a positive relationship with some of the boaters, and we're happy about that. So yeah, and we do have some of our rescue and rehab stories on the page as well. That may give you a specific story that you can follow, but there are a few. And there's not one I could pinpoint right now. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. No, that's a good no, that's a good resource for the group to have access to. And of course, marine strandings or seeing an animal that is in danger or is in a tricky situation or has some sort of fishing gear or equipment. I mean, these are all probably a collection of many different stories that just show why it's really important to have that situational awareness and be aware of what's going on in the water and outside of your boat.
Yeah.
I have a question here from Davey. Does the Pacific Blue Foundation, just here, does the Pacific Blue Foundation and your team interact with local communities to also help with more efficient, basically more efficient boats and more efficient ways of transporting fish, etc.?
Yeah,
That's the question.
thanks for that question. Yes, the simple answer is yes. We are trying to start several programs to increase efficiency, especially around fisheries. So if the communities can get more value for the fish they catch, then they don't have to catch as many fish. So that includes transporting the fish on ice. We are trying to get funding to get a fully electric boat that could be used for transport of fish. Also, actually, in Benga and Unutha, there are no roads. So we are actually trying to get an electric boat to use as a local school bus to take the children from their communities to the school, which happens by boat. So yeah, we are trying to help with that transition to more fuel efficient and eventually fully electric. And we are trying to increase efficiencies, which I think are really important. One other point, if I can, following on from Richard's point about navigation planning, one major impact of boating that we didn't discuss so far today is when boats ground. So there have been even big commercial boats or smaller personal craft that ground on reefs occasionally. And when they do, they can cause a lot of damage. They can take out hundreds of years of coral growth. They can release fuel and oil onto the reef. And I think that really emphasizes how important it is for everybody to really do their planning properly so they're never involved in a situation like that. Right. Because boat groundings can be really bad for coral reefs, seagrasses, and mangroves. And it's really important that everybody takes responsibility to minimize those impacts and try to, hopefully ensure that those crashes don't happen. Thanks.
No, absolutely. That's a really good point, Davey. And we've not touched on that particularly here, but if you've done work in some of the small island Pacific states in the Pacific, more often than not, you're going to see at least 4 or 5 strandings of some sort of boat, either from a yacht boat, a sailboat, a tanker. It's definitely something that is a really important point to point out here, and being able and having your plan, stick to your plan in terms of navigating properly and successfully is really important. Felice, I saw your hand was up. No, okay.
Yes, but you kind of said what I was going to say. That is something that we have an issue with in the Bahamas. We have, and unfortunately, we don't necessarily have full resources or policy, and so those boats are just sitting there. We're actually having that issue in Abaco right now. And some of the NGOs have come together and they'll go out occasionally and do as many dives to remove debris. And we've been really advocating for some support to try and get it moved. But like Davey said, and like you said, it's you will see the boats there, or either on the sandbank or the coral reef or the seagrass bed, and it's not good. And we definitely just don't have the policy or support to back us to get them removed in a timely manner. And so they sit there and they continue to cause destruction over time. And so if there are people out there, and you can provide support when you do visit these places, feel free to reach out to your local NGOs or governmental offices to say, maybe you can help with this, because it's something we need help with.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'm seeing that we are now at time. It's been a very insightful and really educational discussion to have with you all. And thank you all so much for those who registered and attended and put in your great questions. I think, as I mentioned before, this webinar will be recorded and will be publicly available on both iFan's website as well as Living Ocean's website. So please feel free to share that around. And then also, this is the second of 4 webinars that will be hosted by the Navigate with Care. So we have our next webinar on September 18th, which is entitled Understanding AIDS Navigation. So it'll get more into the specifics of different types of buoys, channel markers, etc. So please tune in for that. And also there's content and other material coming out from the Navigate with Care campaign, almost on a daily basis. So please check out either the Living Oceans Foundation website or iFan's website. We have pages dedicated specifically for this campaign. And I believe in the chat, we've on World Mariners Day, we're going to have a video that the team's been working really hard on, that educational video that kind of goes over some high level points of AIDS to navigation. Also, just wanted to say a very, very heartfelt thank you to Felice, Davey, and Richard for joining us today. Really, really appreciate your insights and your expertise on this matter. And hopefully we'll be in contact with you all in the near future. So thank you all so much. And again, thank you for everyone who joined, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.